And he says, if you broaden the base, you don't have to worry about the specifics because it allows you to reach a higher peak and they're already practicing. So why are you trying to do more of that specific stuff, which narrows your base and it doesn't allow you to grow the peak? But nobody's teaching that.
Yeah.
Like that's not, nobody's going on social media and say, just do a lot of different things and you'll be fine. Like it's do this exercise, like top 5 exercises for whatever. And so you start thinking about like general health models and wellness models more than specificity. And even basketball's gotten away from practice. So everybody's got a shooting coach and a skill coach,
Yeah.
right? But nobody has a general coach. So all of these trends are leading down the same route or same path. Um, and I don't know what the answer is like in terms of reversing that direction.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge philosophical change that I don't think people are ready for.
On today's MTB Performance Project, we have Derek Hansen. Derek is a sprint coach, return to play specialist, and educator. Derek, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mickey. This is I know we've been talking offline a lot about stuff, so it's nice to actually put this down.
Yeah, yeah. Not to be like every other podcast, but I think in the context of what we're talking about today and our discussion, can you just kind of give a brief introduction of like kind of how you got to where you are today, some of the things that you're doing on a regular basis?
Oh, how I got here. Where do I start? I have a track and field background primarily, even though as a youth I played a whole bunch of sports, but really got into track and field collegiate level, competed for a while, and then just got into coaching. Not something that I thought I would get into, but just sort of naturally happened where I would, when I was doing my graduate work, I decided to coach and just kind of went from there. And I actually had a job at a consulting engineering firm for 5 years. And I'm like, I don't like this. And I got back into working with sport and everything from strength and conditioning, sprint coaching.
Hmm.
And a lot of this, the funny thing is, a lot of the track and field stuff was, I didn't make any money on it. I just did it because I wanted to learn and kind of try it out,
Hmm.
figure it out, little lab experiment, right? And, if you want to make money, track and field is not where you go, as we found out from the Michael Johnson track meet event there, where everybody's losing money left and right, but you learn a lot. So, uh, whether it was training for performance or handling mishaps and
Hmm.
injuries, you became very self sufficient. So, fast forward to now, I've probably worked for, 15, 20 years working with pro sport in different capacities, whether it's sprint training, speed training, recovery, rehab cases. And now I have a series of courses that I offer in person, online, and just getting into some more interesting consulting projects, as I
Hmm.
mentioned to you before, and just trying to see where it takes me, and just try to stay engaged.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of your early years as a track and field coach has kind of opened the door to pursuing all these different disciplines in the realm of performance and development and stuff like that. They always say like when there's a stopwatch associated with performance, like there's a is a pretty good predictor of like whether or not the things that you're doing are working or not doing, or so it definitely parses out the people who are performing at an elite level from a coaching standpoint to those who aren't necessarily not doing that. So
Yeah, it's instant feedback, but it's also long-term feedback too, in terms of over the development of athlete. Because I've had situations where in one season we did some really good things, and then the next season things plateaued, and so you
mhm.
have to go, okay, well, how should things evolve over time? You can't just keep doing the same things.
Yeah.
Um, so that's very interesting as well. As I always say to people who are involved in sport performance and strength and conditioning, is just coach on the side. Like, even if it's go to the local high school and coach the track team or the wrestling team or the swim team, or whatever it is, something different than what you're doing in your main job, because I think you'll learn a lot working with different populations and really testing yourself.
Yeah, understanding the nuance of like what is really going on with these athletes on a acute and chronic workload over, multiple seasons. And just like you, like we've had the opportunity to work with so many athletes from like high school all the way to their professional age career and then and through retirement. So, it's almost like every year you're getting a new athlete with different issues, slightly different from the previous year. So being able to navigate that is something that like it's always evolving.
Yeah, yeah, and in some ways, like those projects are more satisfying than working with the star athlete for whatever, like 8 weeks, and then not seeing them for a year, and
Hmm.
it's different. It's a different project. It's a different challenge, and you have to approach it a little differently, even psychologically or emotionally. Like it's like okay, because I I do some work with an actor, and I guess I'm his personal trainer. Um, but most of the time we're just like in the gym, what exercise you want to do now, and we're just talking,
Yeah.
right? And it's a different, like, is performance required? Not really. I'm just trying to keep him busy with something other than what he's doing at the time, like acting or whatever. It's like a break. So you can't really take yourself too seriously on certain occasions or certain cases. You're just kind of like, okay, I'm filling in some space here and hopefully providing some sort of value indirectly. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I part of the reason that that triggered me to reach out to you about having this conversation. You and I have worked together on some athletes from like return to play on hamstring issues, but this one's a little bit different. We had a recent athlete in the NFL go down with an Achilles tear, and I know you've been talking pretty openly about like the increased trends and some of the things that are going on with that. And also we are working with another P4 quarterback in college who's coming back from Achilles tear. So it's kind of top of mind for me, both from a preventative standpoint, but now also working with some of these athletes post op. Um, what are some of the what are some of the things from a high level that you're seeing that are contributing to some of these increased likelihood of these injuries?
Yeah, it's everybody wants that singular answer, right? Like it's the turf, it's the whatever, you name it. I've seen different theories of what people think is causing this, and it's extremely complicated.
Hmm.
And when it happens on, like, we went from 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, if there was an Achilles rupture, it would be like, whoa, that's strange, right? And
Yeah.
it would be in a guy in his mid 30s who's kind of trying to extend his career, and so it wasn't out of the realm of like, yeah, okay, yeah, we expect that. Now it's 23-year-olds, 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I'll see all these analyses of like, well, it's the false step, or it's the step back jumper, or the. And I'm like, okay, so you're telling me people didn't do these movements before, and we're trying to come. I understand the biomechanics of it, right? This eccentric loading,
Yeah.
that's a mechanism, right? But there's something else going on. Like this is being set up. So the next thing you go to is like I talked to you about this not Achilles, but there is still an Achilles issue in the NBA, but there's like a calf strain epidemic happening right now. And so, okay, well, what's the problem? And I think somebody said, well, it's like a tournament, the cup, or where it's like some special thing they've added. And do you think
Hmm.
that's more stress having this? I think they just had the final yesterday with Knicks versus San Antonio, and I'm like, no, it's another series of games. Like, is it more stressful? No, I don't really see that. But you got to start looking at things like, well, shoes.
Hmm.
And I train some basketball players on the side, some high school kids, and I'm like, you guys don't wear high tops anymore, do you? Like, they don't exist. Like, you have to go back and buy some sort of throwback shoes to get high cut basketball shoes, but
Yeah.
nobody wears them. I don't think I've seen, and then the kids are like, "Why would you wear high tops? That's strange," right? When that's all I wore when I played in high school, right? And I don't know if that has something to do with it, but definitely shoes have changed.
Mhm.
And has it changed for the right reasons? I don't know. Like, I was trying to delve into what happened. There's a couple of articles out there that said it's all started with Kobe Bryant. And because he grew up in Europe, the soccer players had, low cut soccer shoes and they were more agile. And so he wanted low cut shoes. I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, that's a real scientific, analysis there. But it started with him. And then everybody after that wanted a low cut, zero drop shoe, even though he blew his Achilles out.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Can we blame Kobe Bryant? That's not very respectful, but that that's what I'm leaning towards to some degree with some of these things is you'll see these very rigid zero drop low cut shoes in football too. Like you've seen the football cleats,
Yeah.
right? You try and bend the football cleats and you're like, I can't bend them. Track spikes. And I think, there's a lot of thinking around that going, well, fastest man in the world runs in these shoes. Everybody needs to be in these types of shoes now. So I don't know if there's been an exhaustive examination of the footwear, the impact on the foot, and all the kinetic chain above the foot. Um, is it in the best interest of the shoe companies to say like, hey, there's a problem, maybe we should look at our shoes?
Yeah.
um, so that on a systemic level, I think that deserves some looking into. I don't know if it's the NFL's responsibility or the NBA's, but somebody should look into it. I know there's some specialists that look at feet and do some customization of shoes.
Yeah.
So, so if that's necessary, maybe there should be a broader look at that. I don't know what your thoughts are on the shoe thing.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's because of the increased stiffness of the sole of the shoe is you're losing the intrinsic strength of the foot, and so now it's putting more stress on the connective tissue of the Achilles, or, so on and so forth? Or, like, is that generally kind of what your synopsis is based on what you're seeing?
Yeah, I remember I was working with Charlie Francis back in 2002, and at the time we're working with Tim Montgomery, who just broke the world record, and Nike was sending him new shoes, like, "Hey, we want you to wear this one because you're the world record holder now."
Yeah.
And Charlie grabbed the shoe and he says, "Look, it's not flexing at the big joint of the toe,
Yeah.
and I think this is a problem. This is going to drive problems up into your calf and Achilles." And at the time, that's 23 years ago. I'm just like, oh, I didn't even think twice about it. I just thought, well, they look kind of cool. He should wear them, right? They're paying him to wear them. But now that's in the back of my mind all the time. Is like, does that shoe flex? And
Yeah.
there was another athlete, I won't mention the name of the NFL player, but a buddy of mine was a strength coach, and he said, "Yeah, this athlete always wanted a new pair of cleats every game because, like, Michael Jordan had a new pair of shoes every,
Mhm.
Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant are the problems.
Yeah.
No, and so he put on a new pair of cleats, and if you know football cleats, like you need to break them in.
Yeah.
So, and ultimately, he did tear his Achilles. And so, okay, you start connecting the dots. So, I'm not out here to rail on about the shoe companies, but that deserves an investigation, in my
Mhm.
opinion. And then you can start talking about, well, what's the interaction with the grass and the turf and the grass, everybody's grass versus turf. Well, if you've ever been on an NFL field, every field is different,
Yeah.
right? Not all turf fields are the same. Not all grass fields are the same. At Arrowhead, I was walking around in my like Jordan ones, and I'm like, this is really grippy. I'm wearing these old school basketball shoes,
Mhm.
and the grass felt like it was artificial.
Yeah.
So you can't draw these conclusions around these very simplistic, um, you know, answers to these problems. So that's why when I see people like, and social media is the worst because you'll see like, oh, this is MetLife, and like, yeah, MetLife it's probably not great, but it's all
Yeah.
all of them have the same issues. All the fields, like I think when they put in the new turf at SoFi, people are saying like, "Oh, it's really fast," and then you see people blow their knees out on that turf as well. And then you got the grass surfaces at Vegas in Arizona where they wheel them in
Hmm.
on a platform, and then those fields have inherent problems too because it's not the same as natural grass, even though it's natural grass,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know.
Yeah, so
Those
it's affecting the timing of like when connected tissue is firing, and if you're playing on a different surface, the lack of continuity is probably playing with a lot of the issues there. So,
Yeah, yeah, especially in the field sports. Now, somebody was asking me, "Well, what's going on in the NBA?" I'm like, "Well, it's not the turf, but is there continuity differences on floors, on hardwood floors? If a floor is put over an ice rink,
hmm,
I have no idea. Like, I
yeah,
remember watching Steph Curry was bouncing the ball, and he found some dead spots in the floor
hmm,
in one arena." And he's saying, he's bouncing it, it's not responsive. So maybe there's some continuity issues with the hardwood, the way they lay it out as a portable
yeah,
court. Um, so the surface issue, the shoe issue, the interaction, we should be looking at it, of course. And then I was talking to you about, and I don't want to be again an alarmist, but um, there's a lot of videos out there and a lot of research out there on the impact of COVID,
yeah,
right? Whether it's COVID or the vaccines and spike proteins and blood quality. And and that's when I asked you about that athlete. Was he sick? Did he get COVID? I don't. I'm curious because anecdotally, I have friends my age. I'm in my mid 50s. Um, a number of people have had strokes,
hmm,
right? And you're like, well, they were pretty healthy people. No history, no family history. And then I've had another friend who passed from pancreatic cancer. Um, and again, no risk factors. And then I'm hearing like, okay, we're having 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds getting colon cancer and pancreatic cancer. um, I've heard terms like turbo cancer. I've heard about increased incidence of DVT, deep vein thrombosis. And I don't know, again, is it just being documented more readily, or is it
yeah,
being advertised on social media? um so I think that's something that needs to be looked into as well and investigated. And because you don't, again, people want to go like, well, who's his personal trainer, or who's the athletic training staff, and start blaming people, when there's all these systemic factors out there that might be
yeah,
contributing. um so I've tried to take the 360 view of this. And I want to look at training like, um is training the root cause? Are people doing too much specific work? um and we've talked about that. And combined with the shoes and the surfaces. And but I just think you need to step back, because I know the general population, talking to physical therapists, there's been more general population Achilles tendon
yeah,
ruptures and similar type injuries. So if that's the case, we have to look more broadly.
yeah.
And if Yeah,
I've seen the same thing because we've got a rehabilitation or PTs here in our space, and just in the last 2 years, we've seen the cases go up. Personal friend of mine, and young to old, right? We had a
yep,
we they're working with a high school kid who's, you know, I've never seen a high school kid tear an Achilles before, right? So
yeah,
stuff like that, it raises some suspicion. But like you said, and you alluded to, is anybody who's kind of working with athletes and has dealt with performance on a broad spectrum understands that these injuries are always multifactorial. And so it's like, how many of the variables can we control within our scope of practice, right? Obviously you had mentioned it with professional athletes. You see them in an off season, and then they go to their respective teams, and you know, for the most part, you're hoping they're doing a good job, but we don't have full capacity to work with these athletes year round. So, um, but nonetheless, it's like, how do we set that athlete up for success when they go. And so, um, I think obviously we're performance coaches, and that's kind of the lens we look at everything. So it's like, how do we mitigate risk? And maybe some of the things that I've seen perhaps that we're missing as strength coaches or performance coaches is I see so much of today's training based off of like building like contractile force, like working on contractile tissues and things like that. And I think some of the outputs that some of these athletes are creating across the board is so much bigger because, like you said, there's so much specialization with what we're doing. But then I'm often seeing very little focus on like development of connective tissue, like stuff that's going to build like good quality volume and reps there. And so oftentimes maybe from a physiological standpoint, like these athletes are so robust, but their connective tissue can't sustain the amount of stress and acute and chronic workload. So, and obviously with all the other variables like you're talking about, they hit a threshold and that's what's essentially happening.
Yeah, yeah, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. Where that straw is coming from, I don't know. Could be coming from a bunch of different places, but um, yeah, because I've been exploring and trying to create a course around like general physical preparation, the GPP, right?
Hmm.
Because that has fallen by the wayside because the timelines are shrinking, and it's like, well, are we going to
Yeah.
spend 6 weeks doing general stuff, or are we going to jump into the specific stuff? And I remember I was teaching to NFL staff a number of years ago, and the athletic trainers wanted me to cover more on agility because they thought, well, if we don't do enough agility before training camp, they're not going to be able to handle it. And I'm like, okay, so are we falling into this trap of we have to do the thing that we're afraid of?
Hmm.
Um, or should we have a more robust general program? And it's hard to have a conversation with people who don't understand that concept, because the easy answer is always specific, specific, specific. And so, and I was going through some old notes from Charlie Francis, and he was talking about how general training, in general meaning like it could be like weight room stuff, like
Hmm.
it could be running stuff, it could still be jumps and all that, but pretty general stuff he thought was the answer, for a lot of these sports, because he's talking about creating a wave loading program where he broadens the base of all of these things. And he says, if you broaden the base, you don't have to worry about the specifics because it allows you to reach a higher peak. And they're already practicing, right? They're already covering off that stuff. So why are you trying to do more of that specific stuff, which narrows your base, and it doesn't allow you to grow the peak? So I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? But nobody's teaching that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, nobody's going on social media and say, just do a lot of different things and you'll be fine. Like, it's do this exercise, like top 5 exercises for whatever. And so you start thinking about like general health models and wellness models more than specificity. Um, right. Because once you get into practice and once you get into training camp, into that whole season, it's all specificity. Like,
Yeah.
and even basketball has gotten away from practice. So everybody's got a shooting coach and a skill coach,
Yeah.
right? But nobody has a general coach. So all of these trends are leading down the same route or same path. And I don't know what the answer is, like in terms of reversing that direction.
Yeah.
Like it's a huge philosophical change that I don't think people are ready for.
Yeah, that's such a fine balance of like you said, for most of these athletes where they're quote unquote in season, and also at the amateur level, their in season is just getting longer and longer and longer, and so there's no real time for them to create any general physical adaptation. And you know, there's too much time spent on these like high output, high threshold like exposure to movement, and so there's no base being built. And so oftentimes maybe that's one of the biggest limiting factors. And again, like you look at the injuries across a lot of different sports. I believe it's really, you look at these kids, we're now seeing the products of early specialization across all sports, right? We work with a ton of baseball players, and obviously everybody knows the increased injuries over the last 10, 15 years there. And but kids are still playing. I'm fighting my 8-year-old son's travel coach to say like, no, they don't need to be pitching in December. Like they're 8 years old. And so, I it's a challenge. And oftentimes like the smarter, cooler heads often don't prevail. And it's just this constant like fear mongering of like, well, if I don't do it, my kid's gonna fall behind. And oftentimes it's like, no, no, no. They might fall behind now, but look at where they're gonna end up at the end of their career when it actually matters. And so, and you see it in pro sports, right? And so oftentimes, like you said, it's just trying to be able to shift that pendulum away from what's happening in season all year round, and because they can't sustain that level of outputs all year round. And so maybe again, multifactorial, maybe that's another thing that we're not looking into in terms of how we're mitigating this risk. So
Yeah, it's an infrastructure problem, right? The infrastructure currently is set up for the specialized early specialization model, and if you're not on board with that infrastructure, then yeah, you're not going to make that next team. And the guy, I thought he was the hero of non early specialization, but he's the quarterback in North Texas.
mhm.
Have you been tracking him?
No.
Oh, so the quarterback at North Texas, he's not going to be there anymore because he's now a commodity. But he has like, oh, I can't remember his name, Nestamaker or something like that. Anyways, he was on the Rich Eisen show, and they're talking about this guy came out of nowhere, and he's the starter for North Texas and leads, a lot of categories in college football, and very powerful offense. But he never started at quarterback throughout for pretty much his entire high school career. He
Mhm.
was never a starter, which is unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think when he left school, I think he worked with a quarterback coach towards the end of his high school career and developed some skills. But then he was a walk on at North Texas, and I think it was like sixth on the depth chart. And then some people transferred out, some people got injured, and he slowly moved up to the point where he was the backup, and then they went into a bowl game, and the guy who was the starter left on a transfer,
Mhm.
and he got vaulted to play the bowl game last year, and he threw 4 touchdowns, and he was just amazing. And so now he's a starter, but really he didn't have like he I mean, it's obviously difficult to do that. I wouldn't advise anybody who wants to be a starting quarterback at D1 school to do that, but it shows you that you don't have to. You don't have to do all the specialization. I think he played safety. I think he played other positions in high school. And then now he's probably one of the hottest quarterbacking commodities in Division 1 sports. Um, so it can be done,
Yeah.
but the infrastructure doesn't support that.
Yeah. I think the challenge is that most of mainstream media is constantly pointing towards like these kids who are, let's say, the like elite athletes at the professional level. Like there are always stories about, well, I was an outlier since I was 8 years old, 9 years old. And so like people just think that that's the case, but oftentimes like it's not sexy to talk about the kid who was like, didn't peak in like fifth or sixth grade, but they just continually got better and better. And it's like those are the kids who are creating longevity in sports. And so it's almost like we need to start creating more context around that type of development and how beneficial that is, not just from a performance standpoint, but more from a longevity, right? Because, you know, you've worked with so many professional athletes, same. It's like, I think the best ability is availability. So if our athletes are so specialized early on, by the time they get to professional sports, they're cutting their career short. So it's how are we creating long-term benefit for those athletes, both in our performance and then also like again managing from our skill coaches, like, hey, let's get a period of time where maybe you're not out pitching or you're not out hitting or you're not out throwing, routes to quarter or to receivers and things like that. It's like there's a time and place for that, but oftentimes like making sure you're intentional about taking time away, um, so long as you're giving yourself kind of the time and adequate time to ramp back up, right? Because that's kind of going to be one of my next questions is how are we managing that and those workloads and things like that. So
Yeah. And the thing that I'm seeing is that there's just not enough preparation time at any level. Um, and somebody was talking. Oh, there was a post I saw, and I don't know why Bill Burr was interviewing somebody, but they were talking about development. What happens at the youth ages with development? And development doesn't exist anymore, right?
Mm-mm.
It's all just very skill specific.
Mhm.
Um, and I think at some point, like whether it's you or me or whoever it is, like somebody has to take a leadership role on this stuff and make sure that it's implemented. Um, and having these proper progressions. Like I was thinking, okay, what if you have 6 weeks to prepare somebody? Do you go through the normal 6 weeks that you would do in a program that's 16 weeks, or would you try to jump levels to get up to the final position where you'd be at 16 weeks? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
do I just progress fast, or do I just progress as I normally would and just hope for the best? And I'm thinking about the latter of like, well, let's just do the proper progression and not worry about the outcome too much. And the reason I say that is when I've been doing hamstring rehab, I use that 10 by 10 model, right?
Yep.
10 by 10 yards, 10 by. And there's been cases where the actual hamstring rehabilitation program is usually a short to long, where you go, okay, let's go for 10 for a period, and then we go 15, 20, 25, 30, and then we know that they can do max speed because we've progressed them to max speed.
Mhm.
But there's been cases where, for whatever reason, limited time, limited space, I'm lazy, and I just get them to do the 10 by 10, and I just build volume and repetition. And there's a couple of cases where I have film of people getting thrown back into the game, and I'm hoping they don't run any farther than 10 yards. Like, okay, hopefully he gets tackled. And there's been cases where they've evaded the defender and they went for a 60-yard touchdown, um, numerous occasions, and they look really good.
Yeah.
And they've had no recurrence of hamstring strain. So was it absolutely necessary for me to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, oh, we have to have a 60-meter sprint before we're sure that they can handle it? It's like, well, not necessarily, right? If you have enough density,
Mhm.
you may have enough physiological capacity to do that, right? They've done it before in previous years, so we know that they know what to do when they get there. But physiologically and from an energy system point of view, you could do it with shorter distances. So I'm always thinking about that in terms of these shorter windows, and I don't have to freak out and go, well, I only have 5 weeks, so we have to go first week 10 meters, then 20, then 30, 40, so we can get up to 60. I would be perfectly happy just staying with 10 meters, knowing how to work that, system. Um, so yeah, I think it's very easy to just get it caught into this trap of we need a fast progression because we just don't have time. And I think that's doing a disservice.
Yeah. I feel almost in the post-op rehab setting, it's a little bit easier because you do have time, right?
Mhm.
It's almost the athletes who are, maybe have like a nagging injury where they're halfway through their season, they're banged up, and maybe throughout, our weekly practices, and let's take a football player for example. So you've got your game on the weekends. During the week, like, this athlete's a little bit banged up, so we're trying to, drop volume, maybe drop a little bit intensity. I almost feel like those are the biggest challenges because we can't change the outputs and what that they're going to be exposed to on game day. So, but we're dropping them down too much so that they're not getting enough exposure during the week. So, talking about like an acute spike in workload, I understand their challenges. So what's the balance there with that athlete? And I think that's kind of what's being challenged with, because football's such a physical game, right? Trying to, take it week by week and understand like how the athlete's feeling on a day-to-day basis. Making sure we're still make like they're able to play and ready for games on the weekends, but stressing them enough, that fine balance of like making sure their tissues are stressed so it's not a huge spike on the weekends. What's the nuance there? Is that something that, it's a matter of getting the athlete and the team to understand that, look, I understand like you don't feel your best, but we have to do this in order to maintain those level of outputs, so we're not overextending on the weekend? What's your experience there with that?
Oh, yeah. I every time I see an athlete in that scenario, I'm trying, and again, I'm gonna fall back on the Charlie Francis model. Like I'm trying to look at things as general stressors, right?
Mhm.
I'm not
Yeah.
looking at, well, he needs to do single leg takeoffs or he needs to, work on lateral agility. I'm absolutely not thinking of that. That's going to happen in the practice in the game. Um, so I'm thinking of how can I continually have some sort of stressors from an energy system point of view, from a recruitment point of view, from
Mhm.
like a central nervous system load point of view, and even from like a psychological point of view. Like I remember Al Vermeil saying, um, there's nothing more stressful than like putting a barbell on your back, like a heavy barbell, having that load experienced through your spinal cord
Mhm.
and obviously into your extremities, right? There's something about that that's going to prepare your body. Even though it's non-specific from a nervous system point of view, from and I've been reading stuff on like the brain is like it works on a predictive model, so your brain's not reacting to a stimulus in the spot and going, well, this is how we address it. It's anticipating and going, well, I know this worked before, so we're going to do the same thing. Like it's predicting what it has to do, not reacting.
Mhm.
So if you've placed stress on somebody, like a significant stress, whether it's like a trap bar deadlift, whether it's a jump or an explosive throw or a short sprint, you can't look at the specifics of that. You have to look at the general impact of that event or that exercise on the body in a systemic manner,
Mhm.
right? And that's all anabolic steroids do. Is it's a general, um, what's the word? It's like a systemic amplifier,
Mhm.
right? Because you take anabolic steroids and you go play tennis, which does happen. Um, they get better at tennis. If you take anabolic steroids and you go sprint, and in the old days, a lot of distance runners took testosterone and basic anabolic steroids because it increases blood volume,
Mhm.
right, which drives more oxygen through the system, right? So whatever the said, it's the said principle, right? Specific adaptation to impose demand. So but the anabolic steroid is an amplifier. But if you start approaching training in the same way, like general stressors, systemic amplification, you're going to have a better result when you go and practice basketball or you go and practice football. But the strength and conditioning coach's job is not to become a specialist. It's a generalist.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for ways like, and if people are crapping on Olympic lifting, like it's non-specific, it doesn't do anything, but it's a general stressor if you really look at it, right? But is velocity based training a general stressor, or is it getting too specific? So, you have to really watch that meter. Is the load heavy enough to create a general stimulus? Is the velocity of the movement going to create enough of a stimulus? I don't know, but
Mhm.
um, I talked with Pat Davidson about this, and he's in this bodybuilding culture right now. And there's something about certain things about bodybuilding that can create a general stressor, even though there's a lot of peripheral development. But there might be some good things in there. Like you remember that Charlie Francis motor unit diagram where it's like on the left you have like the heavy lifts and the sprints, and then you got wrist curls on the other side of it. Like we have to pick items from all along that spectrum
Mhm.
to fit our circumstances. But what sometimes when I've presented that diagram, people are like, "Well, that makes means we should do everything on the left, all the explosive stuff." It's like, no, 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 no. That's not what this diagram's about. This diagram is a supermarket of things that you're going to choose to kind of build your approach, given the circumstances and the scenarios that you're involved with, right? And if you pick one high intensity element and three low intensity elements, that's maybe a better balance than picking three high intensity elements, which could interfere with each other and cancel them out or lead to overtraining,
Mhm.
right? And people, for some reason, people don't understand basic periodization now. So it's very exercise specific. It's very again, it's very specific. Everybody's approach is very specific. Like even the Nordic hamstring curl, okay, I get it. You're stressing the hamstring eccentrically, but that's not how it's done in running. But yet you're trying to take something that's very specific in the velocity that you're doing it and say like that's going to handle you at max velocity. I don't really buy that. I understand there's some benefits to strengthening the hamstring. It's no different than the hamstring curl, right? It's a knee flexor application of the hamstring, where at high velocities, it's coming from your hip,
Hmm.
right? It's a hip extensor. So, I think people are just delving into these things in such a specific way that they lose sight of the bigger equation of what we're trying to do. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, it's more complicated, but it is more simple too. Like
Yeah.
you got to take the simple approach, and people are over analyzing it. And is technology making it worse?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like Charlie Francis, like he would say, like, people are constantly asking me what Ben Johnson's vertical jump was. And he's like, I don't care. Like, he's hitting 10 meters when I need him to hit 10 meters. He's hitting 20 when I need. My stopwatch is telling me all I need to know. I don't need to know his vertical jump. But yet we're doing all this counter movement jump analysis
Hmm.
for what? Like, can we not just look at jump height? I don't know. Can the guy touch the basketball hoop? Oh, that's pretty good. Like, he's 5'5" and he can touch a basketball rim. I think that's pretty good. Let's move on now. Right. So it's this micro analysis is getting to a point where you're missing the forest from the trees, right?
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, is from a strength coach or performance coach's perspective, it's how are we really just taking a more generalized approach as it relates to where that athlete might be in their competitive year, in their off season, in their in season, and essentially saying like, look, hey, we know all the specificity you're getting on the field. What are we doing to support that stuff without continually driving more specification in the training process, right? Because we know the things that we can provide as strength coaches, they're certainly not getting from their skill coaches or from the playing field, right? So it's more or less just how do we make them as robust as possible with the least amount of inputs as possible.
Yeah, the approach has to be an abstract um examination, like a conceptual abstract examination. It's not a specific examination. Like, even from an injury point of view, um I was contacted about a basketball player who she tore her hamstring, probably second degree, so significant enough that she was on crutches. And so I know nothing about this athlete, and so I'm saying, okay, what were some of the previous injuries? um and the one that came out is she had a serious concussion a couple of years ago. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's start there.
Hmm.
Is she having issues? Because, basketball players shouldn't be pulling hamstrings. They're not hitting max velocity. So what's going on there? It's a intramuscular coordination issue. Um, there's issues around the pelvis sometimes that you look at. But why don't we look at recruitment? Recruitment sufficiency. Is she able to recruit the hamstring when she needs to? Does a brain injury compromise that? Potentially, right?
Hmm.
So maybe taking her, like, rather than getting her to do Nordics, I don't know if I would do that, but maybe, like, let's do an examination of, like, some very basic things to restore that recruitment level, because it might be coming from her spine.
Hmm.
You don't know, right? That might be more of a central nervous system issue. And does she have problems doing other activities that'll lead us back to this hamstring problem? So again, I think I'm trying to step back and look at the big picture all the time,
Yeah.
and then narrow it back to that problem rather than going, the semi tendinosis isn't firing properly, or
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And
yeah, it's go
that
ahead.
inherently becomes a challenge. And I think that's more of a environment like what are you capable of as a strength coach given, are you managing multiple athletes versus one, right? Like if you're just managing a single athlete, you have a lot more bandwidth and time to kind of get into the details. Whereas, that's inherently the challenge of, team sports and working with multiple athletes at a time. It becomes a challenge to really break down individual cases, and, it's doable, but inherently it's a challenge. So, um,
Yeah, because there was this case, again, these are all things, because I'm writing this article right now. I'll send a copy to you. It's about like why coaching, if you're a good coach, you will be AI proofed. Like you don't have to worry about AI if you're a good coach, because AI is going to pick off the bottom feeders who can't think and they're just
yep.
copying stuff and doing the same workouts over and over again. But the idea, like I remember Charlie Francis again, he was working with the top NFL receiver at the time who had been out with a hamstring injury for almost a year. And then he turned him around in like 6 days and the guy was ready to play. And I'm like, okay, I need to find out what you did. What did you do? He says, he was tight. So I loosened him up. I'm like, okay, that's that's not answering my question, but it really was because over the time it might have been a first degree strain, but it was mismanaged. And if it was mismanaged, then the player starts doubting himself and then he's afraid to sprint. He's afraid to do right. And it's just
Yeah.
downward spiral. And so when Charlie examined, the hamstring and everything around the hamstring, it was just locked up. It was like PTSD.
Yeah.
And so, he was very good with massage and he just loosened things up, gave him some simple things to do. And as soon as that momentum was gained through doing that massage application originally, um, the player just kind of resumed where they were before the injury. Like it was just they got past that trauma and, everything worked out and they won the Super Bowl that year. So I always think back to stuff like that where somebody anecdotally had some success and it was a very simple fix. And
Yeah.
so I'm always drawing on those types
Yeah.
of memories, right? That I learned from somebody, a mentor. But you're not going to learn that by watching Instagram or
Hmm.
TikTok, right?
So, in an effort to kind of wrap up, and, like I said, my goal here was more to glean more information of how, like, in my own practice, how can I potentially mitigate some of these risks, and also in return to play, how are we bringing back these athletes in the right way? From a preventative standpoint, in the context of a strength coach, what are some of the things, if we're looking at like a concurrent model of developing athletes, we're addressing sprints, jumps, like outputs from that standpoint. We're looking at strength. We're looking at accessory and core strength and stability, addressing mobility, stability restrictions. Like, what are some of the things that seem to be missing that we as strength coaches need to perhaps, again, outside of those environmental factors, that we should be focusing on, that might be part of the challenge right now, and falling short of these developmental processes?
Yeah, I think there's just basic stuff like basic energy system development. And, um, we get into these knee jerk reactions of like, the old school warm up was what? Oh, go run around the field 4 times. Um, and now it's like we have to do a functional warm up, which I don't really know what that means, but the idea that sending them on a run, okay, they're going to get hopefully some zone 2 aerobic development. They're going to get better circulation. Like there's so many valuable things that can be accrued from a very basic
Hmm.
recommendation, right? And so I've been doing a lot of work with Andrew Hauser, who's based in Arizona, and he does a lot of moxie monitoring and breath work, and
Hmm.
he's developing aerobic qualities. And a lot of his clients are baseball players.
Hmm.
And when he gets them, he finds out that they're in really bad shape, right? And if they're rehab, like, so guy comes in for an elbow or a shoulder or a hamstring or whatever, he slaps the moxie monitor on them, or he uses thermography and just finds out they have cold spots where there's poor circulation, or the moxie's telling them that, yeah, they have poor muscle oxygenation. And it comes back to, well, what's the solution? Like improving oxygen transport in that specific area or improving it systemically.
Hmm.
And usually it's a systemic thing, right? So let's improve general
Yeah.
aerobic fitness so that this guy gets a better blood supply to his tissues. So little things like that where you're like, okay, do I check that box off? Am I doing the enough aerobic work? And it's going to vary by athlete and sport and individual, but do I at least have that checked off? And then, same with like your strength and your plyos and your, okay, how many accelerations are we doing? So there are boxes that need to be ticked off. And then from there, that's a composition issue. But then now the sequencing of those things,
Mhm.
and are we changing the volumes of those things over time to make sure the exposures are compatible.
Mhm.
So it is kind of like a basic periodization model where and I always use the Charlie Francis vertical integration, so I can see how things are going to change and how they're going to interact with each other. And I don't know if people are doing that because maybe now it's very exercise focused,
Yeah.
right? Like, are we doing our isometrics? Did we do that? Did we do enough agility? And it's again, the pendulum is swinging to all these sort of trends, and it's like, well, okay, is as soon as you add something in, you have to look, is it replacing something? Do I have to take something out?
Mhm.
Right? Or is it interfering with something? So the compatibility has to be assessed of all the training elements to make sure that one, you're getting enough of something, because you could like this whole junk pile theory too that Charlie talked about was, if you just go to a conference and you get 10 new exercises and you keep piling stuff in, it dilutes the product,
Mhm.
right? And variability, like people say, like you have to have planned variability. Well, what's variability? Variability isn't throwing in new stuff all the time. So it's different, like, like the muscle confusion or whatever, those types of theories. Variability is having some very basic things that you change in terms of volume, exposure, intensity, whatever. And it might be, say, six different things, right? That you're interactively changing, and that's the variability we want. It's not like, hey, we got a whole bunch of new exercises, let's try these, or let's do like finger isometrics or whatever. Like, and I think that's the problem now, is people think variability is just mixing things up, but variability is a very planned, precise approach.
Mhm.
And I don't think we have that. We don't have we need some people who are like periodization nerds who are going to geek out on this stuff and figure out, like, do we need to do 30% of our work? Does it need to be specific? And 70% general? And of that general work, how much is aerobic? How much is recruitment? How much is power, right? And then figure out what those numbers are and then plug it in, make it work, and then evaluate it. And then, okay, as we get close to the season, maybe it's a 40-60 model or a 45-55. And then when we get in season, we have to now buffer all that specificity with a more general approach to maintain those energy system qualities. I don't know if people are doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it gets back to our previous part of the conversation where, like, because we're in season so long and we expect so much out of these athletes from a competitive standpoint, like not just in the professional level, but like the collegiate level, right? Like it's a start and stop constantly throughout the year. Like trying to navigate that undulating, calendar is challenging in and of itself in multiple sports. Um, so again, I think it comes back to the lack of generalist work that we're exposing these athletes to, and then it's just too much specialization, both from an energy system standpoint, like you talked earlier about, like that just from an aerobic, like building an aerobic base, like if you're spending too much time in competition, like that's just, you can't do that, and so it just becomes like a big limiting factor for some of these athletes. So
Yeah, and in season, like, maybe I'm part of the problem, but like people are talking about microdosing and doing little bits of this. And my whole point of microdosing wasn't that. My whole point was like, pick a few things and just do them all the time in smaller amounts, but maybe it's on consecutive days, right?
mhm,
Um, but it's like taking antibiotics. If you don't take enough of it, you're not going to get an effect, right? That's why they say you got to take the full bottle, even
mhm,
though the symptoms go away. You got to take them for this period of time. And it's the same with training. Like, you need a certain dose to get a response, an effective response. And if you limit that dose, you're not going to get any response. You're just wasting people's time. So we need some people within the industry to take some chances and go, no, we're going to work on aerobic system development in season or max strength or whatever quality, that's non-specific. And because, as a strength coach, and if you've worked in a team environment, you could probably corroborate this, but when I was working at the collegiate level, there were no shortage of people coming over to me saying, position coach, athletic trainer, um, somebody working in the recreation department, like, hey, you should do more of this.
Yeah.
Right. I saw an article or this, you should do more, single leg agility. And I'm like, fuck off. Like, let me do my job.
Yeah, it's like
Like, you don't,
it's like you
yeah.
going to them and saying, "Well, you should be doing more of this in your practice development."
Yeah, yeah.
Would
Like,
never
yeah, I
happen.
don't yeah, that's what I think that was a Johnny Parker thing. Like, I'm gonna come over and teach you how to
Yeah.
do O line, right? I don't do that. But yeah, it's like you need to have some control over what you can control. And if other people are popping in suggestions who have no clue, like, as to the context of what you're trying to achieve, it's pretty annoying, right? Like, and but I think it's so tough in this environment where you want to keep your job, you don't want to make waves, and
Yeah.
and that's fine. If you want to do that, do that. But when, half your team pulls up with injuries, like, I can't help you there. But if you do take some chances and you try to innovate within the system within that in-season period, I think you're going to see some results. And it might not happen overnight, but it's, again, it's that culture, that infrastructure that we were talking about that has to be developed. And you have to, like, the great thing is that at Indiana University, everybody's wondering, like, oh, how did they turn things around in 2 years? Well, the strength coach, who I've known since 2019, is a very industrious person.
Mhm.
He's always like, when I taught my course, he attended in 2019. He was the guy that came up after the course and said, "I want to go over some stuff with you and try to understand, like, how we would plan this out." And then he went from Texas Tech to JMU, and then now they're at Indiana, and he has everything in place, and the coach lets him do what he needs to do. And people are like, "Oh," and he showed me what their numbers were for man games lost due to injury, and it was the best stat of anybody in the Big Ten. Um, and so, like you said, availability is the best
Yeah.
ability. So if you structure your program properly, you're going to have those types of results. And he works very hard. And I don't know if he gets enough credit, but um, you see the results on the field now.
Yeah, it just shows you how important the collaboration of, like, good skill and, like, sport coaches with strength coaches and PTs and ATCs and all of the like, it's such a force multiplier when it's done properly and everybody's on the same page and, a coach can understand and appreciate where a strength coach is coming from rather than, "Hey, you're taking time away from my practice and you're telling me I can't work with this guy or they gotta do" it's no, we're here to help, and so it's no coincidence that the best organizations with athletes who are consistently available, they collaborate very well and they communicate really well. So,
Yeah, and it's very rare
yeah.
to see all those pieces work together. And then sometimes, like, just because of talent alone, some teams will overcome their inefficiencies, and
Mhm.
you have to be able to recognize that too. And I've seen that before too. And you're like, well, good for them. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's gonna last, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, Derek, this was great. I'm sure this is a probably an ongoing conversation as we continually try to evolve and develop these practices and again, the environmental challenges are what they are, but obviously as strength coaches and performance coaches, we could try to control as many of the variables we can. So, um, this was super helpful. So I appreciate your time. If there's anybody who wants to learn more about what you're doing and maybe dive deeper into some of this stuff, how can they reach out to you or connect with you?
The websites are sprintcoach.com and runningmechanics.com, and just obviously social media. It's usually Derek M. Hansen. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, just direct message me, or um, yeah, hopefully I can help wherever I can. And if I'm doing an in-person course, that's great. I was just telling somebody, like, it's tough because when you do an in-person course on a weekend, there's a lot of information that you have to retain.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I say it's probably better to do the online, just because you can do it at your pace, right? With
Yeah.
progression, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And one of the things that I certainly respect and appreciate is, anytime I've reached out to you and had questions, you've been kind enough to reach out and, take time today to talk. So I really do appreciate it.
well, part of that is like I get to learn from you too, because you're in your environment, and when I hear about your cases and your sort of stories around what's going on, it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like I'm picking your brain as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's very helpful.
Yeah. Well, Derek, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.